Heavenly Father, we come to you tonight, another episode of the podcast. This is a prayer of thanks. Thank you for my job so that I can afford this new equipment for the podcast. Thank you for the internet so we can spread the word of the good news. Thank you for our church where our guest and I met. And of course, thank you for your son Jesus who did everything for us. In Jesus' name we pray. All my rowdy friends are Christians now. A Testimony Podcast. Welcome, everybody. I guess we're going to call this Season 2. We just wanted to give you an update on our last guy that we interviewed, Brendan Stolas. He's a pretty shy guy, and he said he's better one-on-one, but he's actually recording something that he calls morning reflections every once in a while and sending them out to the certain people on his list or whoever wants it. So I'm kind of proud that we got him out of his box there, and he's getting a little bit more brave about sharing the gospel with more than one person at a time. So today we have with us my friend Fernando Hernandez. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
He's a quiet man, but he's very wise, and he has a good sense of humor, and I think that you'll figure that out as we get to talking to him. How old are you, Fernando?
I'm 49.
49 already? God, I remember when you were 48.
Yeah.
And you are married, and you have two boys. They're teenagers, correct?
Yeah, 12 and 13.
Yeah.
Close enough.
And you're an engineer?
Yeah, I'm a mechanical engineer.
He runs the video and audio on our church website, and his wife helps with that as well. She puts up all the sermons up on the audio side, I believe, right?
Yeah, she does the audio on the website, and I'll do the video on Rumble.
Yeah, and hopefully you're going to get this on Rumble for us.
Yeah, well, this should be easy because it's you've already done the work.
Yeah, good. All right, so let's start where I usually start with is your upbringing. Were your parents both saved?
Well, I would say my mom was saved. It's my journey is really a combination of a battle essentially between my parents. My mom, religious, just an angel of a person, and she was raised in a Catholic home, a stable home. Father, mother. There were 9 of them, 9 siblings, wow. 7 girls and 2 boys. But stable home. Anytime I make plans with my mom, her response is, God first. Or one of her aphorisms in Spanish is, uno propone, pero Dios dispone, which means, one plans, but ultimately God determines.
It's like saying God willing all the time.
God willing, yes. Yeah. So I guess you can translate, one propositions, but God dispositions. So so I guess that's really how you would translate it into English. Okay. But she always says that anytime we make plans, it's, God first, or it's, essentially don't get too far ahead, right. Because we were like, for instance, we had Christmas plans. None of it worked out. And my mom was like, well, and then she gave me her aphorism that it's really not up to us. Right. Sometimes God has other plans for us. Yeah. So that's the kind of upbringing I had from my mom. Very consistent, just... I can honestly say I don't think I've ever had a single bad moment with my mom. I'm 49 years. Maybe when she spanked me as a kid, right. I was upset. But otherwise, I can't think of a single moment where I was upset with my mom. Okay. It just doesn't happen. She's just a pleasant person.
And so her faith was like a habit, right?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. It was a habit. It's you see it with my grandmother too. Yeah. It's same thing.
Your grandmother's still, she's like 92 or something like that?
My grandmother's still alive. She's 99 years old.
99, okay, cool.
Yeah, so hopefully June 21st, hopefully she makes it there to 100.
Oh, that's awesome.
But yeah, she's a little bit under the weather these days, but she's still moving. She's still walking.
That's awesome. What about your dad?
So my dad, that's the other side of the coin. He was also raised by a religious mother, but it was complete abject poverty. His mom had 18 children. Wow. He was number 8 with the same dad. The first 8 had the same dad, and my dad's dad, my grandfather, when he saw my dad, he said, "That's not my son," and kind of rejected him. Oh. And my grandmother, who was I don't want to say cruel, but she probably was. But that's just the way you raise kids back then.
It'd be tough.
It was, yeah, exactly. It was abject poverty. It was, I just imagine, the pioneers out in you had to be tough or you just didn't survive. So.
And that was in Mexico?
That was in Mexico, okay. Yeah. I think she probably crossed the line between discipline and cruelty.
Okay.
But, so my dad, the reason he became really antagonistic towards religion was because he says, yeah, one moment my mom is just beating me to a pulp, just torture even.
Right.
And then when she's done, then I see her on her knees praying to her God. And that's what he would say, praying to her God. And so a 5-6-year-old boy, child.
Mixed message for sure.
Exactly. So he actually ran away at 7 because he got tired of the abuse.
Yeah.
So he was on his own from the age of 7.
Dang.
And so he had to survive the streets of Mexico City, getting beat, getting robbed, looking for food, starving. He said he went at one point, years without a shower. So he had that baggage, right. And then he had no affection from his mom,
right.
And his dad abandoned him. His dad said, "That's not my child."
Right.
So for him, there was no sense of family. It was just he still had a love for his mom because even though he never forgave her,
right.
He still honored her in a sense that he would still send her money.
Okay.
He would still visit her, once or twice a year, and she lived in Mexico. He still made the point to visit her.
Right.
She would always ask for forgiveness, but he would never grant it.
Oh, interesting.
So I had that, and so as a child, I would hear from my mom, thank God for this, and we should always be grateful for God.
Right.
And my mom could give you the gospel. She's Catholic. She was. I think right now she's probably a little more evangelical, but it's like Pastor Joe. He lives in California, but New Jersey's still in there.
Right, right.
So that's how my mom is. So my dad was just antagonistic. My mom would say something, like if we just ate, thank God. And my dad would say something like, thank me, I'm the one that worked, earned the money.
Right.
Or if, somebody would make a point about, we should be thankful. My dad would say something like, son, don't believe that garbage.
Yeah.
He goes, you think if there is a God, there'd be this much misery? And I didn't understand exactly where he was coming from. I think I was really in my 30s before I understood. I think it's probably when my kids were born that I really understood my dad's pain. Because he would tell me all the time as a child, he would always say, son, I was on my own at 7. Right. And I was like, sure, Dad, whatever. It just didn't register.
Right.
And even in my 20s, it didn't really register.
Yeah.
I think it really made sense until I had my own children. So it would be like that. My mom, on the one hand, always praising God,
right,
being grateful. And my dad, on the other hand, just reminding me that it's all garbage. So I remember, you can't underestimate the influence of a father on his son. So
that's true.
I tended to side more with his belief system.
Well, it's probably easier.
Yeah, of course. There's no accountability.
Yeah.
It's just, and then you can blame it on. Well, that's just the way the world is.
Yeah, dog eat dog.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I remember one of my mom's sisters, my Aunt Gloria, another angel, just another sweet woman, and she made a remark about, praise God, and I think I don't remember the exact words I said, but I kind of mocked it, and the look on my mom's face was like if she was ready to rip me to shreds.
Yeah.
But my aunt said, no. He says, he's got to figure this out. And, being the kind person she was, he has to figure it out. And my dad, I looked at my dad and he was so proud of me. And
sad.
Yes. I could see he smiled like,
right,
that's my boy,
Yeah.
Don't believe any of that garbage.
Right.
So that's what I had. And another reason is just my dad was the way he was is, there was 18 siblings. I want to say most of them didn't make it to adulthood.
Yeah.
But he told me, he goes, I still remember when I knew there was no God. And we were in Mexico, and he and I were in Mexico just visiting some family in Mexicali, that's actually where I was born. And we were on our way back to the United States, and then he points to a bench. So this is in the probably mid-90s or something like that. And we were driving back, going across the border, and he goes, that bench, he says, that's where I stopped believing in God. And then I said, "What happened?" He goes, "Well," he goes, "that's when your sister passed away." So I had a sister that passed away before I was born.
Right.
It was a horrible, horrible death. So my dad said, he says, "That's when I knew there was no God." He goes, "I remember I left when they pronounced her dead. I walked out of the hospital. I sat in that bench and I cried."
Yeah.
And it makes me a little emotional for him because he was a tough man.
Right.
Meaning tough physically and also tough in that you couldn't beat him down because of what he had already endured.
Right.
But that shook him.
Yeah.
And moving forward, so that was kind of what we had. And me, I'm one of 9 kids.
Right. You're somewhere in the middle, correct?
No, I'm the 8th.
Oh, you're the 8th.
Okay. So, and my dad was the 8th also.
Oh, okay.
So, growing up, and then in 1990, it was the day before my 15th birthday.
Mm-hmm.
2 of my brothers were in a car accident.
Right.
And one of them died at the scene. The other one died about a month later.
Wow.
He was in a coma. And that just absolutely wrecked the family. And I think from there, I remember thinking, yeah, I think Dad is right. There's no God would punish, a family like this. And
it's so hard to understand God's will all the time. Yeah.
And I had just turned 15, and I remember at that point, it was either before or a little after I had actually started reading the Bible, and because my mom had wanted me to read, so she didn't read with me, but I had read it, and I'd read a little bit. I didn't know what the concept of a Christian. I didn't know what that meant.
Right.
I mean, we were Catholic, so that's what we were. I didn't know Christian or Jewish or Muslim. I didn't know what any of that meant.
Right.
But it just ruined the family. It destroyed the family. My brothers, who were, some of them had some, problems because when you have 9 kids, it's hard to, to herd them all, and everyone's doing what they're doing, and also my dad wanted tough kids, and so he came from a chauvinist world where men have to be macho and have a lot of women, and so that was perfectly fine for him if we live like that, because that's how he was raised. That's
he wasn't cheating on your mom though, right?
He did. That was just normal, and my mom accepted it because that was just
it's part of the culture.
It's part of the culture. Yeah. Okay. And you don't even question it. It's just the way it is.
Okay.
So, my family's in chaos, and I remember just thinking, and at that point, I remember even before then, I remember openly mocking God. I remember some of the kids, they were born again in junior high, and I would mock it, make fun of it, and so the seed was already planted, that I thought it was all a joke, and so my family's in chaos, and of course I was like, yeah, this is definitely there's no such thing as God. Mm-hmm. I remember starting to have nightmares, so just painful, horrific nightmares, and there was always an evil presence. That's the only way to describe it. I never saw it. It was just like a shadow that would hover over me. Mm-hmm. Literally, I'd be in bed and this thing would be hovering over me, and pressing down on me, whatever was in my dreams, and it was just painful. I remember waking up in the middle of the night, just sheer terror, because this thing was haunting me. But what's interesting, though, the only way I could break out of that is I would pray in my dream. Mm-hmm. And when I would wake up, I would be mad at myself.
For praying?
Why would you pray to a God that doesn't exist?
Right.
And I'm only a teenager.
Right.
So, and I would be upset that I actually prayed, that I asked God to guide me. And that's actually how I would be able to break that, whatever was holding me. It's in my mind. It's whatever in my dream was holding me down.
Yeah, but you were young enough to understand, is there a God or is there not a God? And you totally denied him, so the devil's like, cool. Yeah. Let's start messing with this dude probably in your dreams, huh?
Yeah, but I would pray, and that's how I would break that evil presence in my dreams.
Wow.
And this went on for years. At 18, right after high school, I joined the Navy. Uh-huh. And I was talking to one of my Navy buddies, and I told him the story. And he he said I think he's the first person that said something like, "Man, you need Jesus," or something like that. One of my Navy buddies, and I said, "Okay." I remember a high school friend. Her mom was used to talk to us about, she would give the gospel all the time, and I would kind of laugh at it like, well, that's just silly. And so I called her up, and she listened to my story, and she says, I want to pray with you. And I was like, okay. And then she goes, no. She goes, I really want to pray with you. And she goes, would you let me pray with you? And I was like, sure. And essentially, she walked me through the sinner's prayer. It's she gave me the gospel, and then afterwards she says, and she asked me, she goes, do you believe? And I think she said, do you believe that Christ died and rose for our sins? And I was like, I think so, and then she says, okay, now go find a church. So that started my journey.
Okay.
Searching. I was only 18 years old, and unfortunately, I came across a legalistic church. And it was a painful experience because everything was very controlling. And they had asked me, "Are you Christian?" I was like, "Well, I don't know. What is a Christian?" And
right.
So I wasn't sure. My friend's mom had already told me, you're Christian now, and now you just have to grow. You just have to find the church, and you have to grow. But that was pretty much it. I didn't. And like I said, unfortunately, I came a very legalistic church, very controlling, and if you didn't abide by their guidelines, you lost your salvation, and you would go to hell.
Okay.
So, and they weren't shy about telling you that.
They were like kind of Calvinistic.
Not necessarily. It was just a legalistic. Just a legalistic church.
A lot of control there, huh?
Yeah, a lot of control. But what was amazing, what got me confused is there were some amazing people there.
Yeah.
But they were under a system that just didn't allow them to really function. But I met some really great people. Some, I would say, just firm believers. But the problem is there was the system they were under, I think, just was misguided and would lead them astray into legalistic, controlling.
You were pretty young. Did you think that every church was like that?
Well, I didn't know any better because the only church I knew was the Catholic Church. Okay. And then we were standing, we were kneeling, we were standing. And so I didn't know what this was, but I did know that we were reading the Bible a lot, and I was reading stories that my mom had told me, but I was like, oh, that's where that story came from. Because my mom used to tell me stories, but most of the time I didn't realize they were from the Bible. And then I was like, oh, that's why she says what she says. Because they were reading me things, and a lot of what my mom would say was making sense. So I was stationed in Chicago, and then I was getting transferred to San Diego, and I thought, okay, I'll just break away. This is my opportunity to break away. Yeah. And I was like, it was nice knowing you guys. And they're like, oh, by the way, we have a San Diego branch, and they'll be waiting for you.
They're all waiting for you at the airport. Come with us.
So, yeah, eventually I literally had to run away from them.
Right.
And I thought, it's like Pastor Joe says, if that's Christianity, you can give me hell any day.
Yeah.
And that was my mentality. I thought, well, whatever Christianity is, I want no part of it.
Right.
I don't want any part of it. I didn't want to go in churches I knew Catholicism. I knew they weren't going to try to, they would try to, guilt you into doing things, but it wasn't a legalistic system like that. So, if I went to my hometown and my mom went to church, I might go with her or to a wedding, but I didn't set foot in any church because. Did
you still read the Bible?
I did, but I was confused because, I would read in Leviticus and I'm like, what is all this stuff?
Yeah.
What do you mean you shouldn't boil a calf in the mother's? What does that even mean?
Yeah.
And things like that. So a lot of it didn't make any sense.
Okay.
And then I would read Romans, and where Paul he's Romans 1:1, where he's talking about how Joe quotes it all the time, how we are without excuse, and I was like, are we? I don't know. It just. And then I would think to myself, then what's wrong with those people? Why were they nuts? So I got out of the Navy and I went to work, and there was this man there they called Father Joe.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, one of these guys, and people would ask him questions and they would challenge him.
Uh-huh.
And then I heard him give the gospel the same way my friend's mom gave it.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, oh, okay, I've heard that. That's different.
Right.
So I would listen to Joe, and I'm like, oh, okay, I've never heard it said like that.
Right.
So I kept listening, and I was like, maybe those people were just wrong, or
Yeah.
maybe. And I didn't really know about denominations. I mean, I kind of did, but I knew there was like Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses, but I didn't know different denominations.
Right.
To me, there was Catholic and everything else. I just, but the more I listened to him, the more I realized I like what he's saying. I appreciate what he's saying.
Right.
So he started inviting me to, different little churches. I was still, I don't know, I wasn't 100% sure. I still thought, no, well, as soon as I go in there, they're going to ask me for my pay stub.
Right.
Coincidentally, that's what that other church
Yeah.
did. They literally asked me for my pay stub, and then they said, oh, yeah, we got to take 10%. I was like, 10%? I was like, I don't make anything.
Yeah.
And I was like, why do you have to take 10%? And they're like, go, because they told me, the church is a church. They were like, but it's also a business.
Yeah.
And then I was like, and I just scratched my head, okay. And then when they asked me for the pay stub, they said, so there's your net and your gross. And they said, it's 10% of your gross because it's God before the government.
Right.
And I'm like, well, that doesn't seem right, but okay. So when I met Joe, and some people asked him about money, and he made a remark like, if the day I ever asked someone for money from the pulpit, you throw me out. And then I was like, well, that's different.
Yeah.
So I just started listening, and he gave me some of he started making recommendations. He gave me like themes material.
Yeah, same here.
I read a lot of it. Some of it is like too academic for me, but I did read it
At that time. Right?
Yeah, at that time it was like way too academic. I didn't quite understand his style of writing.
He had like a lot of the terminology.
Yeah.
I think he made up himself.
Exactly.
But I mean, it works.
So it was. But I encountered along the way. I encountered other, just teachers and other pastors, and then I started going. I would occasionally go to Joe's church, and eventually, I pulled away. There was I think the low point. I'm still in my early 20s. 22, 23 years old. About 26. It was a low point I think it was a low point in my life because, I mentioned my family had just fallen apart.
Right.
I think that was operating on some kind of, how people talk about a functional autism. So I had like some kind of, a functional depression there was just something lingering.
Right.
And my whole family had it, there was a sadness in my family.
Yeah.
My mom had lost 3 children already. And then, after my brothers died, one of my nieces was murdered, and she was only 6 years old.
Wow.
And so, there's this tragedy that's just looming over us.
Yeah.
And
So you need God the most.
Yeah, but I was still reluctant, because in the back of my mind, I kept thinking of that church.
Right.
And then there was an event that just ripped me to shreds. It was an act of betrayal just unbelievable betrayal, and it just rocked me to my core. And I remember just being at a really low point. I've never been one for drugs, alcohol, nothing.
Right.
Or no suicide thoughts, nothing like that. But it just rocked me, and I remember just being so down and depressed, and I was in really low state, and I just didn't know what to do. And you know me, I'm like, even in prayer, I'm like, I don't find myself talking to God a lot. I'm even there. I'm very, I wouldn't say stoic, but even there, very quiet.
Right.
And I think I get that from my parents, because both my parents were very stoic, or my mom still is. And there's not much emotion.
Yeah.
There's a resolve there, but without much emotion.
Yeah. Well, you said your brother used to antagonize you, and you're like kept quiet.
Yes, that's true.
Stay out
Yeah,
of his,
my oldest brother, he loved picking. He had
Yeah.
6 younger brothers,
Yeah.
so he had to pick.
Yeah.
And it was
so
like,
you were street smart. You just stayed quiet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I knew that if I reacted,
Yeah.
I was going to get it from him. So I think I adapted to the situation I was in.
Mm-hmm.
And my brother wasn't cruel. He just liked picking on his little brothers.
Yeah.
So I had that, and in prayer, and I'd already met, and I started dating my wife soon, a little shortly after that. But I was lost, and I was just, I don't know how to describe it. Just, you're just lost. There's no, even on some sense, I believe in Christ, and I know, but it was just a painful, it was a painful few months.
So you didn't have the foundation of
exactly,
a full Christian, so it crumbled.
Yeah.
Right?
And I remember that was one of the few times I prayed. So because I was, I was just recently, dating a girlfriend, and I just kind of like, God, where do you want me? What do you want me?
Right.
What do you want from me? Just guide me, direct me.
Yeah.
Is she the woman for me? I need answers.
Right.
And I've never been one where I thought that God, I've never heard his voice. I've never seen him, but I felt a quiet peace that over the next, year or two, that weight that I carried, that burden that I carried from my family's tragedy, it vanished. It was gone, and I didn't even realize it when it had happened. I just realized one day that I was happy. I wasn't.
You filled your life with other stuff that was better.
Yeah, and then I also listened. I listened a lot to, different. Of course, and then we started going back to Pastor Joe's church, and I was listening, and Joe always recommended, I listened to a lot of different teachers.
Yeah.
And incidentally, that's probably like my gift is my curious nature that's probably why I'm an engineer, and I'm just seeking, but that's also my biggest fault is that because I'm always searching, I'll tend to move on a lot and never absorb something fully because I'm already moving on to the next, where I'll spend, months just going into prophecy and then, all right, and next thing I'm doing looking at apologetics and next, or whatever it is, whatever captures my mind. It's just, I'm moving on into different topics and it's just, I've had it since I was a child. Just so many things interest me.
Right.
And, it's just God's creation. There's so many things out there that I want to know, but you can't. We have finite mind, finite time.
Right.
It's not for us to know, and it's hard for me to just say, "Oh, yeah." But I'm still searching. I'm still.
Well, there's nothing wrong with learning.
No, you're right, and so I'm always looking at a bunch of different things. Yeah, I think, it was around 26, 27, like I said, when that switch turned.
Okay.
And by the time I was like 29, I felt pretty solid. I was no longer, I could say I was no longer depressed. I just felt good. And
could you call yourself a Christian at that point? I
think so. Oh yeah, by then certainly.
Okay.
But it was still, but even then I think I was just a baby then because I was just finding the way. My favorite verse, I don't know how to describe it. I think it's part of my curious nature. It's Jesus, John 8:30, 8:58. Before Abraham was born, I am. And because that to me brought like the Old Testament and the New Testament, it like when he says those words, because I'd read in Old Testament and a lot of it didn't make any sense.
Right.
And then, but when he says I am, I realized, I see what's going on. He is the
great I am.
The great I am.
Yeah. He's like the burning bush.
He's the burning bush, and I'm like, wow. And for some reason, when I understood that, it everything just clicked, and it was easier for me to understand a lot of these things.
Oh, good.
And my favorite story has always been, and I think even from a child, was the thief on the cross. And it was obviously the guy's he's guilty of whatever crime that deserves, a penalty of death.
Right.
And yet he finds Christ, if you will, and he finds redemption. And ultimately, I think that's what happened to my dad. So
really,
my dad. I think on some level he wanted to believe. I think he didn't want to believe everything was just for nothing.
Right.
So he started going to church with my sister.
The Catholic Church?
The Catholic Church, yeah. And so my sisters, very devoted, and she does a lot for her church. And I'm not exactly sure why he went with her, or if he had been going more often, but he passed away in December of 2017.
Okay.
So this incident happened in November of 2017.
Oh.
So he goes to church with my sister, and the preacher or the priest, he's talking, and I don't know if they did like an altar call or something like that. I don't know if that's common in Catholic churches,
I don't think so.
But my dad went up to the altar.
Oh, okay.
And he started talking to the priest, and my sister's like just watching him, and she says, "Yeah." Then Dad got on his knees, and all the priests prayed
on him.
Yeah, they laid hands on him, and they
Okay.
prayed for him. And when he came back to sit with my sister, "What was that all about, Dad?" He goes, "I asked God for forgiveness."
That's great.
Yeah. So and then about a month later, he passed away. So I believe, because when I would give him, I would give him like that little book of John that Joe
Right.
gave. I gave it to him, and he goes, my dad says, "Well, it's the same thing as the Bible." I said, "Just read it,
Right.
Dad."
Yeah.
And then, so I think on some level there was a yearning. There was
Yeah. You get old enough, you just don't want to be so angry all the time, probably,
Yeah. And also, like with us, my dad wasn't the guy. My dad never told me, "I love you, son." He
Right.
never said, "I'm proud of you."
Right.
He didn't really give us hugs until we were already grown men. When I'd
Right.
see him, he'd give me a hug.
Yeah.
But he did do that with my children.
Yeah.
So I could
Okay.
see he would show affection with them. One of my brothers asked, "Hey," he goes, "Did Dad ever tell you he loved you?" And all of the siblings looked at each other, were like, "No." And he says, "You know what? He told me once." And he goes, and that's because I kind of forced it out of him. He says, "Dad, I love you." He goes, "Okay, son." He goes, "No, Dad, I want you to know." "All right, son." He goes, "Dad." He goes, "All right, I love you." That's one of my brothers got an "I love you" from my
there
dad.
you go.
Like I said, it's my story. It's not. There was nothing in me that ever wanted to be a wild man. It was
sex, drugs, and rock and roll for you, huh?
No, it was never in me. And I think part of it, like I said, was my upbringing.
Right.
I saw what it would do to my mom when one of my
Yeah.
brothers would go astray. And I remember from a very young age saying, "I'm never going to do that to my mom."
Right.
So I made that decision when I was like 7 years old.
That's cool.
So at 7, I knew I would never be a drug addict, even womanizer. I knew I was never going to do that. So it's not like an accomplishment, because it was already done. It's like salvation. You do it once and
Yeah.
you're covered. I made that decision at a very young age, and it carried with me. But the pain and misery, the being lost, that's something that only God could prepare you for. Only
Right.
Christ, the cross.
Yeah.
Only that could really prepare you for something like that.
Well, your mom was a really good influence on you then.
Yeah, and eventually, my mom lost a fourth child,
Mm-hmm.
and my nephew, his son passed away a few years
Right.
ago. The boy was only 7 years old,
I remember.
and his wife asked my mom, like, "How do you do it? How do you do it? How did you, She's like, "You lost 4." He
Right.
goes, "How did you do it?" And my mom just, she puts her hands together and looks up. She
Yeah.
says, without God, there's no hope. Without Christ,
Yeah.
there's no hope." And she says, that's not to say my mom doesn't have pain in her life, but she says, without my God, I would be nothing.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be able to function, essentially.
Right.
And so that's kind of, a quick version, of my story. And
So her faith is kind of, I don't know. I've been reading a little bit, and I'm kind of trying to pull a lot of things together. But like faith and trust are
Yeah.
very similar.
yeah,
As far as like faith is kind of like trust in God's will, no
Yeah.
matter what.
yeah,
And it's just like some of the stuff that can happen to people, just like would jack up anybody else, and you're like, okay, God, this has got to make sense somehow in your will.
yeah.
So I got to go with it. You know what I mean? And you give that to Him.
Yeah, and well, that's another thing. The nightmares,
Mm-hmm.
they stopped in my early 20s, and it's when I started trying to go to church, and on occasion I would have one, but it became easy in my dream to overcome it. It was real easy where that whatever that force was, it had no hold on me.
That's awesome.
And then now I have no idea. Now if I have anything that feels like a nightmare, it's pretty easy for me to in my own dreams I know quick prayer, and then it just goes away.
So your subconscious knew that if you prayed,
even though
your subconscious was a believer, even though when you woke up you were just a regular guy.
And I would hate it.
Yeah.
I would be mad at myself for praying.
Yeah.
And so I'm, my goal is to instill that in my children, and of course, we're all walking contradictions. We profess something, but sometimes we stumble.
Yeah.
The good thing about children is they remind you, they let you know when you're being a hypocrite or you're doing wrong. I try to build that relationship with my wife, to make sure we have a strong foundation and something stable. Like I think my mom, she had a stable home, where my dad did not, and it was chaos, and it showed in the way they approached life.
Yeah.
So, that's kind of my story, my testimony, if you will.
All right. Well, I got a couple questions for you. That was very good and very concise. I appreciate that. So the major hurdles in your life that God has helped you with is basically the loss of so many family members.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Like your foundation is strong. So you can be the strength in your family.
Yeah.
When they're breaking down because they don't have.
Yeah, and I get that. Like I said, I get that from my mom. She's not to say she's endured. So I know a little bit of that is just watching her faith and watching her strength.
So what do you feel about what happened to us the other night when Joe made us elders, you and I?
Well, initially I was like, am I worthy of that position? And I think with anything, it's I think in a sense you maybe never really worthy of it, but you work at it and you just improve. You make the effort, you give it to God, and let God guide you.
Yeah, I think we're going to be needed this year.
Yep.
And to at least save our church for a while.
Yep.
Because I think Joe's going to have a rough year.
Yeah.
I hope not, but I mean, the writing's on the wall. So.
Yes.
I kind of felt bad. I was making a bunch of jokes while he was telling us, but I'm like, just made me a little uncomfortable at first because I was, I'm just a guy.
Exactly. Yeah.
So.
And that's the other thing. Even like in my work, my boss, he always says he's just a grunt that gets the job done. Mm-hmm. And I've always seen myself as just a grunt. I was in the Navy. I was an enlisted man. I was construction. So I'm just a grunt, I'm just an everyday person. There's a grunt that can get it done,
the Queen Bee needs workers too.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
All right, so a couple questions. You already told me your favorite verse. That's good. Do you have any spiritual goals or any problems you're working on that you want to share with us? Or
no problems per se, other than just being consistent.
Yeah,
it's easy to go astray. And I don't mean with vice or anything, but just be, like I said, for me going astray would just be lazy, or sometimes like I said, I have a habit of just going down rabbit holes that will distract me. And
so you want to show your sons the discipline.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. And that's my biggest, like I said, my strength and weakness is my curiosity, but sometimes it'll lead me down rabbit holes that bear no fruit, other than just knowing, all the capitals or all the presidents. It's just knowledge for the sake of knowledge. So there's times where my wife sees me reading something and she goes, "You're such a nerd," My son called me that the other day.
Do you have a favorite extra biblical book, like the one that Joe always talks about is not the Case for Christ, but the
Late Great Planet Earth?
No, the verdict.
Evidence that demands a verdict.
Yeah, evidence.
Yeah,
do you have a book like that changed
your
life?
I have that book. I gave my copy to my brother, and then so I had to buy a new one.
Yeah, I gave mine to my daughter, and then I gave her a copy, and I'm like, I don't even know where mine is, and she goes, I think we still have it.
Yeah, So yeah, I bought the book, and then I bought the audiobook.
Okay. Do you have any? Is that your favorite book? That's not the Bible, or?
Well, there's a lot of different things I read.
Right.
Sometimes it's just scientific books.
Uh-huh.
I'll read things even that might even seem antagonistic to Christianity.
Right.
Because one of my friends asked me once. He goes, you're a Christian and you're professing Christian. He goes, he goes, why do you seek things out that insult your religious sensibilities? Mm-hmm. And I was like, I don't know. I said, for one, it's a way for me to. I'm not perfect. There's always a possibility we're wrong, but I said I find it, and if I know what people are saying against,
you can be a better apologetic.
Yeah, I know where exactly where I can make a better defense.
Yeah. Like if you're reading a book on Mormonism, say, or whatever, you're like,
exactly,
okay, this is where they're wrong, or whatever. Yeah, right.
Or anything where it could be from an atheist perspective.
Yeah.
And then I'll say, okay, I see why they're attacking Christianity, and okay, here's places where I've made that same mistake.
Right.
And then I can adjust my behavior, saying, I don't need to do that anymore because it's a stumbling block for people who don't believe.
Right.
And so for those reasons. And then, just like I said, my curious nature, I want to know, even if I don't agree with them necessarily, it's important for me to know how they think or what they think or why they think that. Like my dad, once I really got to know him, I understood his hesitation and his antagonism towards religion.
Right. No, that's smart. Well, good. That was just about perfect. This this episode of All My Rowdy Friends Are Christian Now were brought to you by TWO Publishing. God bless you all. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for
having me.
See
you guys next month.
All my rowdy friends are Christians now. A testimony podcast.